Welcome to the podcast series Inclusive Research and Innovation in Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics. Inclusive research and innovation takes place whenever science, technology, engineering and mathematics scholars actively integrate the diversity of human beings in their work. In doing so, they contribute to inclusive processes and results. Yet, how do we get there? My name is Claudia Werker, and I'm an associate professor at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. I host this podcast series on IRI in STEM. Today, I welcome my colleague, Professor Dr. Claudia Wagner, holding the chair for Applied Computational Social Sciences at RWTH Aachen University. She has been working, amongst other things, on how algorithms influence our decision-making. And I'm very curious today to learn how diversity of human beings plays a role in algorithms and decision-making. Welcome, Claudia.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
I'm very happy to have you. So perhaps you tell us a bit about your professional background and your research and innovation activities to start with.
Yes, sure. My background is in computer science. I did my PhD at the Technical University Graz in 2013. And at that time, I became really interested in the intersection between computer science and the social sciences because I was studying social media platforms. And on the one hand, it's really interesting to look at these platforms because algorithms shape them. But at the same time, of course, these platforms are spaces where humans interact with each other, and understanding the interplay between people and algorithms really got me extremely interested. And that's why I moved on for my postdoc to Germany, where I started at GESIS, which is a Leibniz Institute for the Social Sciences, which really allowed me to work in a very interdisciplinary department, the Computational Social Science Department that was funded in 2013. This was one of the first departments in Europe that really did this type of research that I was already a bit familiar with because I had the chance to do some internships in Silicon Valley during my PhD, where companies such as Facebook, Google, HP, Xerox PARC and others already did this type of research on the intersection between computer science and social science, understanding how algorithms shape socio-technical systems. Afterwards, became a junior professor for data science at the University Koblenz-Landau and later moved to RWTH Aachen. And I'm now also leading this computational social science department that I joined after my PhD. In my research, I'm on the one hand really interested in understanding how the social sciences can use this huge amount of digital trace data that is available today and new technologies such as AI algorithms to gain better insights into societies and of course also derive then policy implications from those insights. And I'm also interested in the social consequences of algorithms. And here I'm on the one hand trying to do data-driven studies and experiments and simulations. So I have a quantitative background since my training is in computer science, and I collaborate with social scientists that are also quantitative empirical social scientists. So this is the toolbox with which I'm working. And that's why my perspective on this, extremely broad topic, inclusive algorithms, is also maybe slightly narrower than, the topic is, because I'm really interested in outcome fairness of algorithms and procedural fairness and how these algorithms affect the actions between people and social media platforms in general on a micro level, but also on a macro level.
Very interesting. Perhaps because that gives me a good perspective, could you tell me what the coolest result would be in your research and innovation?
Well, that's a very good question. I think on the one hand, it would be extremely valuable to really understand the interplay between algorithms and humans better, because I think that's the holy grail, so to speak. We always look at algorithms and we know that they are consuming data that is generated by humans. And that's, of course, why they also, to some extent, show and reveal human biases. And then humans are also interacting with them. And this might, lead to further biases. But typically, it's really hard to disentangle these effects. We don't know what the different potential sources of bias, how much they really contribute to the final bias that we see. So I think what would be extremely cool would be to have platforms where researchers have much more control, because currently the coolest results that we see from my perspective in this area are research that is done in collaborations with companies, where researchers, for example, got access to metadata, right, where they were collaborating with big companies, because this really enables them to look at to what extent, our news feeds on Facebook biased because people select certain things because they have an interest and that leads to certain bias, or to what extent is the algorithm increasing such bias. And this is only possible if you collaborate with companies. And I think that's not how it should be, because first, companies have a lot of control over what kind of research people can do. And of course, they also have certain interests. So I feel like having a platform where we could run such experiments and have control as researchers would be extremely valuable.
The last thing you were saying, that of course companies have very vested interests, that is rather interesting. I mean, I'm even astonished that they want to have this kind of research. But then, of course, the question is, what is their interest in that? Is it really bias-free algorithms and bias-free results, fair results, or what is their interest?
To some extent, I think their interest is showing that it's not their algorithms, but it's people that are the problem. Because, of course, the data that people produce and also the bias that people bring in, right? This is an important factor. And recent research shows that it's an extremely important factor that has been, for example, done in collaboration with Meta and is published in a couple of Science and Nature papers. So I do think that that's, of course, in the interest of companies, that this becomes more prominent, that this is an important factor. But of course, I also do think that they also see that they have a certain responsibility, as long as it's not against their business model. They are probably interested also in, fairness and ensuring that social media is not really putting down democracies. I mean, that's for sure also not in their interest.
Yeah, I understand. Still, I wonder, would you prefer to have, let's say, public funding for this kind of research to start with, or work with other partners, also possibly from the public sector? What would solve that?
I think public funding would be important here, and really on, a European level, because I think this could be a platform where, researchers that have an interest in algorithms, socio-technical systems, social processes on these systems could work with the platform. And this should be free of, industrial interests, right? It could be a space where researchers could explore how these systems work and how algorithms shape them, and how we can maybe also test innovative new types of algorithms that might actually over time lead to healthier communities, to higher debate quality on social media and so on. The problem is that this is extremely expensive, not because the platform that needs to be built. I mean, this is something that is, I think, technically possible, but really getting the people on this platform, right? Ensuring that we have a large sample of people, and also a diverse sample of people that is actually, using this platform. This would be expensive and maybe even comparable with infrastructures that, in the social sciences, the survey infrastructures that we build for social science research in Germany. That is something that GESIS, the company that I'm working for, is doing. And this is also an expensive endeavor, and you need to ensure that you have high quality sample, and you need to pay participants to a certain extent so that they also engage with the surveys. And I think such a platform would need similar incentives. So I do see a lot of administrative work ensuring the quality of the sample and ensuring that people really stay on the platform and also incentivizing people. So I think this is nothing that a single institution could do by themselves. It needs to be a collective effort of researchers across different countries.
Yes, I can understand that. Perhaps zooming in on your particular research, because as every researcher, we are always zooming in on a particular question. Could you perhaps tell now the listeners what your research is about?
Yeah, I did some work on social networks where I was particularly interested on how algorithms affect the visibility of different groups in social networks. So here, the observation was that we do have a lot of homophily in social networks, which means that similar birds flock together. And this is quite well known in sociology that this happens, but it has unexpected effects if algorithms that exploit the structure of social networks are used to rank or filter people. And when you search on social network platforms for people and the algorithm is using information about the structure, then this puts minorities at a disadvantage, for example. And this can have consequences if you think about platforms such as LinkedIn or other hiring platforms where you might be interested in looking for people that have a certain profile. And maybe if we think about, STEM disciplines, we would maybe have less female persons on this platform. And this might actually put them at a disadvantage if there is homophily on this specific platform.
Is there anything that you can do about it with your research results?
Absolutely. I mean, there are alternative algorithms already that people have developed. So, for example, we looked at PageRank and colleagues have developed a fair version of PageRank. And we are also currently doing some experiments with that. And this is an extremely useful algorithm that already counteracts this bias. So there are computer scientists that work on these algorithms. And in our work, we are now basically looking at under which conditions do these algorithms solve the problem, right? Because there is a broad space of options that we can look at. So we can, for example, vary minority sizes. We can vary levels of homophily. We can look at more than two groups and then understand how different types of algorithms that have been developed to be fairer actually, manage to achieve fairness. And so in which settings this is possible and in which settings this is extremely difficult.
Okay, that is really very cool. You were already telling me quite a bit about your transdisciplinary endeavors, so working across the borders between academia and industry on the one hand side, possibly also working with the public sector. You were also suggesting that you work interdisciplinarily with social scientists at a large scale, but you were saying you are only working on quantitative data and that you would need qualitative data to investigate other kinds of research questions. Could you go into that a bit?
Yeah, I think one limitation of the work that I'm doing is certainly that I focus on specific aspects of the question of inclusive algorithms, which is the perspective of outcome fairness and procedural fairness. So the algorithms that I'm looking at how they produce certain outcomes, under which conditions they produce what types of outcomes. And for those outcomes, I use different fairness metrics to somehow assess the goodness, so to speak, of the outcome. So that's a very quantitative perspective on that, right? And at the same time, I'm also interested in procedural fairness, where I can also look at how the algorithm actually processes information. So which features are, for example, important for the algorithm. And also here we can see certain types of information we do not want that the algorithm actually exploits in the decision-making process. And that would count then as measures of procedural fairness. But what I'm not doing, because the tool set that I'm working with, I think is not really particularly good for this type of questions, is zooming out more, right? What is the larger context in which these algorithms have been developed? What is the socio-technical system in which they are embedded? Who are the people that create these algorithms? What are the interests of those people? This research is extremely important because it zooms out and puts everything into more context. But this is often also done with qualitative methods or mixed methods. So this is the type of research I would say that I'm less familiar with, but I'm really appreciating it.
I guess because of time, you are also not really pursuing it, but leave that to others to do so.
Exactly.
Otherwise, I would invite you to join us because we are doing mixed methods with the help of the Responsible Research and Innovation Systems approach, which is usually about socio-technical systems to start with. But that would be another conversation. So let's keep within the podcast topic. So you are really very much doing what I would call inclusive research and innovation. Now the question is, do you have to overcome specific barriers beyond the data problems and funding problems you were mentioning, but perhaps also people who do not appreciate or do not understand why you are investigating this in particular?
I think in the community where I'm publishing, so computational social science and also applied computer science, there is a lot of awareness that it's important that algorithms become fairer. There is a lot of debate on how exactly we can measure fairness, and this is an open debate. No one has the right answer. There are many different measures that one can use, and in the end it's also, I think, a question that relates to what are the values that are important in a specific context, right? So it's not something that you can out of context quantify, but I still think that there is a lot of appreciation of this type of research because the awareness in computer science that it's important to look at social consequences of algorithms and AI has increased a lot from my point of view.
It's very good to hear. I would, of course, be very interested in how you measure fairness and which kind of values you use and where they are coming from.
Yeah, there are, as I said, different notions. So maybe I can give you two examples that are frequently used and I'm also using in my research. So one notion is this idea of similar people should be treated similar, so that there are then different types of metrics that would embed this notion that we are comparing items that have high similarities and are then looking at differences in outcomes or differences in how they are treated by the algorithm to quantify how fair the algorithm acts. And then there is this other notion that is not always in line with notion of treat similar people similar, which would be that you want to have a certain minimum level of visibility, for example, for each group. So independent of characteristics, you want to ensure that certain groups are not completely ignored by the algorithm or ranked so low that they, have zero chances to be seen. So this would then be more this quota-based approach, that you basically say there are certain size differences and proportional to the size of groups, you also want them to be represented in the final outcome. And you want to ensure that they are proportionally also considered by the algorithm. So this would be another notion. And they are not always in line, right? So they also, depending on what you choose, you would get different insights into how fair a system is.
So basically, if I understand it correctly, the values and also the measurement of fairness is really determined by the researcher, or I would even say the tradition in your research community to how to approach that.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, there are nice summary papers by now that, give a really good overview of the types of measures that the community has used. And then people pick. Yeah, so I think it's a bit the tradition in the research field, plus then some preferences for one or the other. I mean, many people, I do think, use then multiple measures because it's very clear that just using one measure is definitely not a good idea. So because that would lead to too much cherry-picked results, I would say. So typically the standard is that people try to use broad set of measures and then discuss the results in the light of those measures.
I'm wondering whether there is any tradition or best practice to actually include those in the studies that actually are discriminated against by the usual kinds of algorithms. Has that been done yet?
I mean, I think it has been done, but not extensively. So this is a very good question. So I think it's extremely promising to include people that are especially at risk. But often the studies are done in simulated environments because, as I mentioned before, we do not have these experimental platform where we can invite people and then really experiment with how do they perceive results, what are the algorithms doing? Because here I would agree that participatory approaches would be extremely valuable and really ensuring that those that are at high risk are really included in these platforms and give feedback. But often when we look at quantitative papers, it's based on existing data sets where people run experiments on them or simulated data. And so there is then no kind of additional inclusion of specific groups. I mean, sometimes they might be already in the data, but then they are not interviewed. So there is, I think, not that much active feedback and inclusion of this group, which would be certainly valuable.
It sounds like something really for a mixed method approach. I mean, I was triggered by your sentence that similar people should be treated similarly, because it might be that they don't want to be treated similarly. And I have a colleague working on ableism, techno-ableism even, and she used to give the example of exoskeleton applications for handicapped people, and the kind of idea that many researchers have that when someone is physically handicapped and can only sit in a wheelchair, that this person wants to stand upright and move upright. And that does not seem to be the case, at least not for everyone. So even if you have various people in a similar situation, it might still be that one would be very happy with an exoskeleton approach, standing right up, moving right up. And another one would rather prefer to stay in a wheelchair, but have this wheelchair have much more tools and things that could help them.
Now another example came to my mind, an area where this maybe happens slightly more. I'm also working on hate speech and dehumanization online. And in this area, people often use annotations to get algorithms started. So they would ask people what types of messages they would perceive as dehumanizing or as violent or abusive. And there it's maybe common practice is a bit too much, but there some people started really including groups that are at risk of harassment. And researchers have shown that they have different perceptions. So there is clear empirical evidence for including these groups because victims of hate online are consistently labeling things differently from those that have not experienced hate. And this is a strong indication for including different groups of people, especially those that are potentially affected, is extremely important.
Very interesting example. Given our conversation, is there anything you would like to share with us today that you did not have a chance to do before because I did not ask the right questions?
Maybe just one final thought, because we mainly talked about this research line of looking into social consequences of algorithms that I'm very interested in. But since I'm working also at an infrastructure institute that provides infrastructure for the social sciences, I'm also interested in understanding what are the opportunities that new types of algorithms and new types of data sources provide for the social sciences. And also here, I think it's very important to look at how representative those data sets are, which is also a question of inclusion, right? So who is included in this data and how fair or how representative also algorithms are for the phenomenon that social scientists want to measure. So here it's a different notion, I think, of fairness, because when we think about social scientists, for example, that want to measure populism or sexist attitudes in social media data sets, then it's extremely important to also look what type of sexism, for example, are those algorithms measuring. It might be that there is also a lot of bias because the way those algorithms have been trained is that they maybe have just been exposed to certain facets of sexism, but not to others. And that then again might lead to biased conclusions that we as researchers or social scientists in general draw from applying those algorithms. So I really see that also in this area, inclusive algorithms and inclusive research is extremely important to ensure the validity of the research that we are doing.
So basically you are saying you might be overlooking sexism in this example because you are blind for particular facets.
Exactly. So we have seen that. So we have done some research specifically on sexism, where we saw that certain aspects, such as rejection of feminism was an example, is not really covered by algorithms well, because they haven't seen many examples of that online. So this might be because it's not so common, or because, some researchers collected data sets where, for whatever reasons, because they decided on a certain, a strategy for collecting data, this was not included. So also here, we need to ask ourselves, who are the people that are included in this data set, and to what extent is the phenomenon that we want to measure and that we want the algorithm to be trained on really represented in this data set. I think this is really important also for methodological research in computational social science.
Yeah, I do understand that. As you are mentioning the methodological aspects, is there anything that you would like to share regarding the differences between diverse people for whom you measure data that you have to consider? Or is that usually not a huge problem that you just say we have a variance here and, we use the usual statistical measures and then that is fine?
No, I think this is definitely an open question. Often we do not even have enough insights to be able to assess if the data set is diverse enough, because we don't have, sociodemographic information, for example. That means we can try to infer them from the profiles of people on social media, which is also then, of course, not 100% perfect. So there are certain limitations to what can be done. There are other ways of producing social media data sets where we have more control, and we are currently also looking at these options. That is then based on data donations. So at GESIS, we have panel infrastructures where we have, for the German population at least, representative samples. And there we can, of course, ask people if they want to donate their social media data, so that we have better understanding of who are the people that are included in our data set and who are the people that are not included.
That is even another dimension of what makes inclusive research and innovation challenging, but also so very interesting. So thank you very much for contributing to our podcast series, Inclusive Research and Innovation in STEM. This was Claudia Wagner and Claudia Werker. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.